Welcome to Letters to Louie with Abby Algiers. Good morning, Abby.
Good morning, Sally.
We are going to be recording this next letter in the new year, which is very exciting.
Yes.
And this is a great experience that your father, Dr. James Algiers, experienced. Maybe at the time he didn't realize what a great experience this was, but as it came to fruition and as he thought about later and wrote his letter to Louis Fry, you can see the experience that he went through as well as his fellow employees. And this takes place in what is now Hartford Aurora Hospital, but it originally was St. Joseph's Hospital.
Correct.
So
Correct.
let's let our viewers experience this letter and what your dad experienced.
Okay, excellent.
Great.
Dear Louie, I've got a good one for you. Crowds and control. As the world population has grown, now by alarming numbers, one is left with fear and alarm at gatherings of any magnitude. One's mere presence in a crowd becomes the cause of some degree of fear, especially as one ages, as one becomes less agile, and as one loses the strength and ability to respond to changing circumstances. Crowds are unpredictable, controlling, and digest the members who constitute the crowd. One loses identity in a crowd. Individual space is surrendered to elbows, butts, and bad breath. The center of a crowd is frightening. There is no escape. To fight to the outer edges becomes harder as one ages. And so, meetings, congregations, and celebrations are youthful events. If elderly persons attend crowded events, when leaving, the last statement is so often, "That's the last time I'm going." Speakers control assemblies. Surgeons and scrub nurses vie for control of surgical suites. Mothers control homes and families. Teachers sometimes control classrooms. And pastors think they control souls and sinning. Doctors also think they control patients. Many times, events are controlled by the least likely individuals. One such person was Annie. I initially met Annie one August morning in my first office. She entered, a small, thin woman, short of breath, clinging to her husband, Nick, who was really short of breath. She was wild-eyed. He was calm. She was initially demanding to be seen. He remained cool and rolled his eyes and stated, "Oh, Anna, be patient." She ignored him and turned to me. "Doctor, the only reason I am here is that this is the only office on the ground floor. All of the other doctors are on the second floor, and at my age, 60, I cannot walk up the flight of 18 stairs. I counted them all. I want you to take care of me." She said all of this without taking a breath and with little evidence of her shortness of breath. This began an interesting 39 years of care of Annie and 15 years of Nick. Annie and Nick had moved from a poor farm in the north to Hartford, where they bought a small 15-acre plot of land with a barn and a home. It was on the north side and overlooked a marsh and a waterway. There they lived for 10 years and then sold the place and built a small 1,100 square foot home over a drive-in basement garage. They had no children. Annie had had poorly described surgical abdominal procedures when very young and just married. From her descriptions, I believe she had tubal pregnancies and endometriosis, which resulted in a sterility problem. She regretted the surgery until her dying day. She was small, thin, and apparently fragile. In fact, she was small, thin, and anything but fragile. Historically, Annie had a problem with supraventricular tachyarrhythmia. She periodically developed alarming, frightening episodes of rapid heart action, pounding in the chest, shortness of breath, wide eyes, and death-defying fright. These episodes had been present for years and had occurred in the morning, afternoon, and evening. They occurred in spring, summer, fall, or winter. She could never tell, but always anticipated a spell at any time. These were the days before right atrial mapping and electrophysiology and ablation, present-day sedation and treatment of the problem. Those were the days of house calls, sedation and reassurance, the days before beta blockers and calcium channel drugs. Those were the days of sunshine and dark ages. Those were the days of Annie crowd control, a crowd controlled by Annie, of Nick and me. It was a well-known fact that our annual 2-week family trip to the east or west, on arrival home at 3 p.m., even before unpacking, the telephone would ring and Nick, in his appealing voice, would ask for a house call. Annie has another spell. In fact, she has had 5 spells during your vacation. This time it's for real. The priest just left. It always amazed me what 50 milligrams of Demerol, reassurance, and 20 minutes of bedside care would do. She relaxed, she slept, and Dorothy and the kids unpacked. Nick, who had severe chronic lung disease, developed pneumonia following the swine flu inoculation. He became progressively more incapacitated and died. Annie became more dependent, and in the days before nursing homes, went to the hospital for acute care and eventual placement on the first floor of the old hospital. There she lived, thrived, and controlled the crowds. The doctors, the nuns, the hospital administrators, the nurses, aides, and kitchen help, the cleaning staff, and the visiting Joint Commission of Hospitals. Her room was in the west wing of the first floor, an area which over the years went through modifications and revisions. During those changes, rooms were made into offices, offices into suites, and constant turmoil as the character and practices of the hospital changed. Throughout these changes was one constant, Annie. When she had been admitted as a long-term care, she had, during one of her terminal episodes, convinced the nuns that she would stay for her dying care. She not only convinced the Mother Superior, but had the arrangement placed in writing. Her recovery was amazing. Her room was moved as progress was made in the hospital. The hospital was enlarged. The structure was changed almost constantly during the next 20 years, but the one constant was Annie. She had an amazing facility for having an episode when the census was low. She improved almost dramatically if the beds were full. She proved to be an asset and not a liability to the hospital. She convinced the social services that a move to another care center would kill her, and she was allowed to stay for near-terminal care. This lasted for another 7 years, and during that time, her room was moved to a small, windowed room directly across from the administrator's suite. She was finally in control. She was like an 85-pound gorilla. Eyes and presence, observing, never challenging, always available to take up space in the acute hospital when the census was low. That little old woman worked the system like no one else. The administrator was watched. He subjectively was chagrined. He was, without his knowledge, controlled by the eyes and ears of the hospital. Each new administrator would set about to remove the presence from the hospital, or at least from the room across the hall. But somehow she remained. Her room opened on the main entrance hall to the administration, to the records room, and into the doctor's check-in board. In that strategic position, Annie was able to see all and to know all. She heard discussions, was aware of problems, noted a romance or two developing within the staff and nursing department, and became aware of the hostility of the 2 groups in city that were vying for power. That old woman knew all. I always made rounds early in the morning, checked in at 7 a.m., and rounded on the medical floor. Each day, I either saw, spoke to, or answered a message on my check-in box from or about Annie. Being her physician, she thought I was at her beck and call, and I suppose I was. I responded to all sorts of complaints, but the greatest response was to the almost daily conversation, and sometimes night conversation initiated by Annie as I checked out at 10 o'clock. Before leaving, I had to check her pulse, look at her tearing eye, or note the inflammation of her bunion. This was a ritual, but what the heck, the old woman needed some attention. I was rewarded by a cup of tea, a moment of rocking in the old rocker chair, and she had a moment of attention. Slowly, she revealed her past. Nothing sordid, just nothing to be embarrassed about, but an ordinary past. She lived there in the hospital for the remainder of her life. She lived, controlled, and moved in and out of the crowd. She was crowd control of the personnel of the hospital, of the administrators, of the physicians, the nurses, the kitchen help. When all were accounted for, Annie was crowd and control of herself and her space. Eventually, at the age of 100, Annie died. She slept away one night. In her will of one page, she left me her old rocker. It still rocks in the family.
What a great story.
I know.
And the fact that you have the rocking chair is amazing.
I know.
And his medical bag, I love that. I can visualize this whole thing happening. I mean, he was such a prolific writer, and I don't know if your dad was aware of how wonderful, descriptive of a writer he was.
I don't think he was aware. I think he was on some level.
Okay.
He knew, but I think even he surprised himself when he would read the stuff. He would email and say, "Hey, this is pretty good."
What do you think?
Yes, it is really good.
And I know you're a writer yourself, and you have a blog, and we talked about the website, letterstolouie.com, that our viewers could try to navigate to see these letters. I also wanted to talk about the celebration of life that your family held for him. It was a wonderful experience. Many people shared stories.
Right.
And I think this is such a wonderful legacy that he's left, and so current in what's happening right now in our world with COVID and the variants, crowd control.
Oh, yes. It was kind of ironic to read it because it's kind of like crowds. What are crowds now? We know them on a different level,
right?
And we're isolated from them, but not. It's just...
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the groups become smaller, and I think as the aging population actually is growing because we're living longer, their groups are becoming smaller. I was talking with someone earlier this week about his mother and how she was doing, and her group is dwindling.
Right.
And so these letters to Louie, I think, are so important to share those stories. And again, the celebration of life that you had for your parents, actually, and the sharing of stories from people that were instrumental in their lives or were a part of their lives, I think that is so important to continue to share this in this type of format if people are not out and about in the crowd.
Definitely. And the stories might have been about my dad's life, but really the stories are kind of about all our lives.
Yes.
Everybody has an Annie in their life that maybe you're like, oh, here we go again. But that person, appreciates it more than you can imagine.
Yes. It's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you coming in and sharing the story. I look forward to more.
Thank you.
And to our viewers, as always, thank you for watching.